As Cheryl mentioned, my guest today was born in the country of Pakistan and immigrated to Canada with his family at the age of 12. Growing up under the immense pressure of cultural expectations, he found himself struggling to live out an authentic Christian faith. Well, now he's an author, media pastor to church. He's an HR manager at a healthcare education company. He's married with a wonderful 3-year-old daughter and shares today his amazing journey, which has led to profound spiritual growth and a purpose-driven life. Welcome to 100 Huntley Street, Ayub Paul.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you here. I think it bears mentioning that many years ago, your dad, Peter Paul, was one of our guests here on the program, interviewed by Kathy Maines. And so we've heard a little bit from your family's perspective on ministry here in Canada. But I want to just start out, before we get into your book, because we're going to talk a lot about that this interview, but I just wanted to help our viewers get a little bit of a sense of the unique challenges that immigrants in Canada face relating to sort of assimilation into Western culture that we might not necessarily understand.
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges that I personally felt as well, and specifically for the younger immigrants, is the pressure to fit in. Because a lot of times when you come in, it just feels a different world altogether. So you do everything to try to fit into the culture, to try to fit into the society, try to make friends. And that's what's really, it kind of stands out that you're trying to fit in. And I think for the older immigrants as well, it's more so to prove that they're also successful in this country, because they might have come from professional backgrounds back home, and now they have to adapt to different, they have to do some labor jobs and some of those, some jobs that are not necessarily the same as what they were doing before.
Outside of their professional careers from
exactly.
back home.
So they have to adapt to those and try to prove success. And sometimes they start to compare themselves to the people who have been here already. And it's very difficult, because now you're trying to prove yourself to somebody, and they have been here for much longer. So it's a bit of a challenge there as well. So trying to fit in, the pressure to prove to other people that you're successful are the two major challenges that I've seen.
Yeah, of course. And then trying to provide for your family. Because if you're immigrants to this country, you need to find work, you need to be able to provide for your family. Yeah. And there are many responsibilities there. Now, I know you were born into a Christian home. Your mom and dad are in the ministry. But there came a point in time where you had to make that decision for yourself to follow Jesus. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that decision, that season.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I did grow up in a Christian home, and both of my parents are full-time pastors. And so I've been, very familiar with the Word of God and reading scriptures and doing daily devotions. But I think after my baptism, which was in 2007, I was living a life which I would consider a religious life. But it wasn't up until 2015 where I went through a lot of personal challenges, and I really felt that before I drifted away from God, because I was like, maybe I don't need God, maybe I need to try something else. And I was just, I was involved in the religious activities, but my heart was not with God. But then suddenly, I started to have this calling, like it was like God's voice calling me back. And in 2016, I started to give my life fully to God, and I started to read more of the scripture and start to spend more time in prayer. And that's when my life really changed. So I think I really relate to the C.S. Lewis quote that God whispers in your pleasure, but he shouts in your pain. So I think those painful challenges in 2015, personal painful challenges, were really helpful for me to have a personal relationship with God. And since then, I've been really strong in my faith, and I've been growing ever since.
Yeah. It's no question, that you are passionate about following Jesus. And your life is somewhat of a miracle, because we're not going to necessarily get into this. You touch on it in your book, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But you're a bit of a miracle, because motorcycles is the mode of transportation in Pakistan. And you were involved in a pretty serious accident with your mom and dad. And they weren't even sure if you would fully recover because of the head trauma. Tell us quickly about that before we get into your book, because it's a miracle that you're even authoring books these days.
Yeah, I think it was a big miracle, because as I mentioned in the book, like the mode of transportation for the middle class families, even still today in Pakistan, is motorcycle. So I was a few months old and they were carrying me and I fell and I had a really bad head injury, and the doctors said that I may not survive, or even if I survive, I may have Down syndrome, or I may not be able to like fully function. I may be disabled. So I think that the Lord did much more than that. He gave me extra gifts. I feel that because there was a lot of prayers that were happening. My family was praying, and God gave me a new life. So I think that because of that, once I knew that, my parents told me that afterwards, but then they always dedicated me to serve the Lord in whatever capacity. But once I knew that God has a bigger purpose for me, and that's why he saved me, because it was not in my doing.
Absolutely, and a bigger purpose indeed is the case in your book, I Can and I Will Through God's Power. I would describe this as a bit of a believer's manual. It's really good. It's like one of those quick reference books where you can go if you're like, what is our position on this? How should I be living my life if I'm facing a certain issue? You take the time to really cover a number of the potholes that even as followers of Christ, Ayub, we can fall into. And I should mention there's a shining endorsement from our beloved Greg Musselman from here on Huntley Street. Yeah. We love Greg. Tell us what about your story prompted you to write this book?
I think what prompted me was the fact that I was brought up, I was an immigrant, and the other part was that I was a son of a pastor. Both of my parents are full-time pastors, as I mentioned. So there's a lot of things which are concealed when you're in ministry because you're worshiping all the time, you're praising all the time. So there might be some things which kind of you're blindsided by. So there were some things that I wanted to talk about, which I felt there were potholes in my life. And I know that a lot of other people will relate to that as well, because sometimes when you're involved, you don't necessarily know that those are the wrong things, because, you might think because you're doing ministry, it's okay for you to gossip or it's okay for you to please people, but it's not necessarily true, because when you read the scriptures go against that. And that's why I tried to talk, exactly from the scriptures. I try to relate certain examples of how those things can really stop your spiritual growth.
Yeah. So. And you're right, and you cover a lot of these hot topics because we can get so consumed serving the kingdom and doing God's work that we don't necessarily we're getting sideswiped by some of these issues. One of the big ones, I think, for so many of us is struggling with this idea of people pleasing. Yeah. I mean, I found myself in seasons of just wanting to keep everyone happy, and sometimes even at the expense of my own integrity. And that's a big chapter in your book. Yeah. I mean, you cover this off. How does, I have to say, the cultural emphasis, specifically from your context of the South Asian upbringing, how does that contribute to this challenge?
I think in the South Asian culture, and I'm sure other cultures as well, there's having a family reputation or image is really important. So sometimes you end up sacrificing a lot of your values and your personal beliefs because you want to please other people, or you want to do things where you don't want to offend other people or relatives and relations. And so that's what I talk about in the book too, because what happens is that you're more concerned about keeping that reputation, that image, versus what you actually believe or what the scripture says about certain situations. So that to me was a big factor, because I felt that I was kind of under attack with that as well, because I have been a people pleaser, and for certain things, I was not able to share some of those hardships that I was going through, because, again, I was very concerned about what my image will look like and what would people think. Oh, like a pastor's kid is going through certain things, so there must be something wrong with the ministry. So,
I was gonna say just along those lines, how does the desire for approval and belonging affect one's or impact an individual's decision making? Because it can affect everything, right? Because Absolutely. You're so consumed with keeping someone, a community of people happy. Yeah. Right?
I think it really affects it because you're more concerned about what others think. So for example, in career choices too, there's only a handful of traditional career choices that are very famous among the South Asian culture. There's a doctor, lawyer, engineer. So beyond that, you really have to explain yourself why you are.
There are only those 3 programs exist in university.
Exactly.
Medicine, law, or engineering.
Engineering.
Right.
So it's very hard to kind of explain that you are successful or you made it if you have a different job. So I think a lot of it stems from that, from the people pleasing or just the traditional. The values that people say that this is what you need to do in order to be successful. And if you're doing anything beyond that, then there must be something wrong. And that's why everybody wants to kind of make sure that they follow that path.
Yeah.
So that's what I felt.
No, that's good. And I think, it's really important that we get a hold of the truth that the only person we need to be pleasing really is Jesus.
Absolutely.
Right. And because we're not going to keep everyone happy. And even from a cultural context, and it can be a little bit of a stretching for our family, even those that follow Christ alongside us, to not necessarily, want to go along with that script, so to speak. You talked about fitting in, being one of the challenges of an immigrant family. And, I can say even for myself, so oftentimes we can, to try and create social connections or want to fit in with people, we can find ourselves engaging in what we like to spiritually call sharing about other people's, affairs and things going on in their lives. It's called gossiping.
Yes.
And you deal with this one. It's a big one.
It's a big one.
Right. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think so a lot of it stems from the soap operas or the dramas that we have in the South Asian culture, where there's a lot of gossip. So people kind of think it's okay to talk about someone or someone's situation with other people, and they do so and they call it sharing. But because it's done in a negative context, it's not necessarily to improve the situation. So that's why I would say it's really harmful. And one of the things that really stood out to me when I was writing that chapter was Ephesians, the verse from the Bible, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. And it really helped me break it down into 3 steps. And I call it the 3-step test. So it's your conversation wholesome? Is your conversation going to help somebody? If someone wants to listen to it, are they going to benefit from it? So if you want to really have a measure, you can measure your conversation against that standard from the Bible and see whether it's going to help somebody. And if you're just looking for some more practical ways, I think one of the things you can really do is to guard your mouth and to really understand what the words that are coming out of your mouth, are they going to hurt somebody? The second thing that I learned personally from my life was that you need to have a healthy hobby where you are not idle, because an idle mind is a devil's workshop, as the saying goes. And the third thing we personally had to do, like my wife and I, was you have to sometimes limit your interactions with people who are trying to gossip with you or trying to trap you into the gossip. And sometimes those could be family members. And in certain cases, you're not able to cut off completely, but you can limit and you can love them at a distance. But in extreme cases, you may have to part ways with those friends and people that make you want to gossip. Yeah. So gossip is a big one. It's a big trap.
It is a big one, and we can often cloak it in this idea of sharing or out of the best intentions for other people. There are so many of the sort of the hot topics that you cover in this book, Ayub, and we're running out of time. So I want to get to this one because I think it's really, really integral to your story. And you talk a little bit about, the importance of understanding our identity.
Yes.
Because your name is actually a bit of an Islamic/Christian hybrid.
Yeah.
Was that problematic for you at one time?
Yes, it's always been problematic for me because, as you know, I came out to Canada when I was 12 years old, but when I was in Pakistan, my name Ayub was okay, but the last name Paul was problematic because immediately you could tell that that's a Christian name, and as long as you just say your first name, that's fine. But then in schools or just like if you have to share your full name with somebody, they could immediately tell. When I came out to Canada, it was not necessarily persecution, but I would often get that it's a weird combination of a name, because why is your name why is your first name your last name? Because usually people will have their first name and then their cultural name would be their last name. So it was a bit of a challenge for me to explain that Ayub actually is the prophet Job from the Bible, and it's a translation in Urdu. And my grandfather named me that, and he named me because he had a lot of patience. So he was very inspired by the story of Prophet Job. So that was something that was problematic. And even right now, when I went back.
You just recently returned from Pakistan. In 30 seconds, tell us about the state of things in Pakistan right now for Christians in the church, because you've just returned.
I think they're still the same. There's a lot of discrimination. I would just quickly share one story where we were just leaving for Canada. We were just returning, and just at the airport, there was immigration police that stopped myself and my brother, and he was in a different vehicle. So we had 3 vehicles, and they stopped him, and he was with my cousin. So they asked him for the passports and just his last name. So his last name was Paul, and they immediately said, "So you're a Christian?" And they saw the passport, and they're like, "So you're going back?" So then he said, "Yeah." And they immediately asked him, "So why don't you consider converting to Islam? Might as well convert because it's a better religion." And if my brother answered no, then that would be considered blasphemy. So he was, he just kind of choked up. He didn't know what to say. But my cousin, who was a local here, he just kind of immediately joked and he just laughed. He said, "Oh, you know what? He'll think about it," just to kind of get out of the situation, because otherwise, those, if they stop you, they can do anything to you because you're just at the airport. And they're the immigration
police. They can create problems for you.
Yeah, they have the highest authority, so they could put any type of law, a blasphemy law, on you. So that was one of the experiences which I didn't necessarily face throughout when I was there, but it was just like as I was returning, it kind of was a reminder that you still don't belong. So.
Right, and your book, you cover so many other spiritual principles in here that we just didn't have time to get into. But thank you for bringing us a little bit of an update about the state of things in Pakistan in our closing minutes together, Ayub. And Job, you must be a very patient, mad man being named after Job. His book is "I Can and I Will Through God's Power." It's a hardcover, and it also comes with a journal that you can actually journal along with him. 120-day journey, living boldly for Christ. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Ayub. We'll have to have you back and get more of your story. There's so much in this book. It's a reminder that our experiences as followers of Christ can be unique to our upbringing, and you've really shed some light on the Southeast Asian experience. And your presence today here reminds us that we have spiritual family in countries like Pakistan that we need to be praying for, that are suffering great persecution. Thank you for being a light here in this country through the various ministry and media outlets that you're a part of. God bless you, and we'll look forward